Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we're pulling back the digital curtain on something maybe a little less talked about, this whole world of unlicensed betting apps. Our mission, really, is to unpack what these actually are, how they operate sort of outside the lines, and maybe most importantly, what the real risks are for you if you happen to stumble across one.
Yeah, and you see them around, don't you? They might pop up in ads or maybe, a friend mentions one they're using, and they look well. They look incredibly polished. Huge bonuses promised, fast payouts, really slick interfaces. On the surface, honestly, they seem just like any other betting platform.
Right. But the absolute core issue, looking at the material we've got here, is that they are operating completely without a license.
Precisely. Unlike the regulated platforms, the ones that hold licenses from bodies like, say, the UK Gambling Commission or maybe jurisdictions known for gaming like Malta or Curacao, these apps have just skipped that whole process.
Okay, hang on. So if they don't have a license,
hmm
what does that actually mean for you? The person thinking about placing a bet.
It means there's just no oversight at all. Think of it like this. Licensed operators have rules they absolutely must follow about fairness, security, how they handle payouts. Unlicensed ones, zero requirements. The source material makes it really starkly clear. If you win, especially if it's a big win, your funds can simply vanish. The app might suddenly stop working. Customer support, gone. Poof.
And you literally have nowhere legitimate to go, no one to complain to.
Exactly. There's no regulatory authority you can file a complaint with, no legal body that can, force them to pay up or even just respond to you. You are, as our source material rather vividly puts it, essentially trying to sue a ghost.
Wow. That's a powerful image. So if they can't get licensed and they can't really operate out in the open, how do they even reach people? How do they, thrive?
This is where their methods get, well, interesting and maybe a bit shady, frankly. Because they aren't licensed, they generally can't get listed in the official app stores, Google Play, the Apple App Store.
So you won't just find them by searching there.
Highly unlikely. No. Their distribution tends to be much more direct, sometimes almost clandestine. You might download them via what's called an APK file if you're on Android. That's basically the app's installation package, but you get it straight from a website, bypassing the official store check. Or they might spread through invite-only websites, maybe private chat groups on platforms like Telegram or WhatsApp. The source even mentions they sometimes pay influencers to promote them, often through less obvious channels.
Wow. Okay. So it's like a whole network operating outside the mainstream systems. You mentioned a dark underbelly earlier. What does the source material tell us about that side of things?
Yeah, this is probably the most concerning aspect, really. The material strongly suggests that some of these unlicensed operations aren't just trying to skirt regulations. They are sometimes outright fronts for serious criminal activity. We're talking money laundering, financial fraud, even links to organized crime groups.
Wait, hold on. So if I just place a small bet on one of these apps, I could be, accidentally involved in money laundering without even knowing it.
Potentially, yes. That's the risk. The money you deposit, the money you bet with, it could be part of a much larger scheme to wash dirty funds. They move money around opaquely using things like cryptocurrency, various offshore digital wallets, a whole web of maybe fake user accounts. So by placing your bet, your, legitimate money gets mixed into this flow, and you could unknowingly be helping facilitate their illegal operations.
Okay, that's a really significant point to understand. But the source does also note that not all unlicensed apps are necessarily these big criminal fronts, right? Some might have other reasons.
That's true, and it's an important distinction the source makes. Some operators might be unlicensed simply because, say, they want to avoid the high taxes in certain regulated markets. Or maybe they're trying to operate in countries where getting a traditional license is incredibly difficult, maybe even impossible. Their main motive might not be malicious fraud against every user.
So they might not be actively trying to, rip you off every single time you play?
Perhaps not with every single transaction for every single user, no. But here's the critical point that the source really emphasizes. Without regulation, those fundamental protections, they're still completely absent. Their underlying intent might differ, okay, but the risk to you, the user, is essentially the same. There's still no authority making sure things are fair or that you'll actually get paid if you win.
Right. So what are the specific ways the source says users get hurt because of this lack of oversight? What actually happens?
Well, there's a pretty clear list of dangers mentioned. They can change the odds on a game after you've already placed your bet, sometimes even mid-game.
Change the odds during the game. That
Yeah.
just completely undermines the whole idea of a fair bet.
Absolutely, it does. They can also just void your bets, maybe claiming some technicality without any real proof or proper reason. And of course, they can simply refuse to pay out winnings. Doesn't matter how valid your win is.
And just block your account. So you can't even log in.
Yep, that's a common tactic. Lock you out, ignore your messages. And it goes beyond just your money, too. They can also steal your personal data. Your identity details you might have provided, your payment information, and then sell it on the dark web or to other criminals. And the source material is quite direct here. It states these aren't just like theoretical possibilities. These tactics often do happen. It's common.
Okay, wow. With all these massive risks, losing your money, getting tangled up potentially with crime, having your data stolen, why on earth would anyone be drawn to use these apps in the first place? What's the appeal the source mentions?
It seems to boil down to a few key factors, really. Often it's the lure of these just unbelievably high bonuses they offer, way beyond what regulated sites can realistically afford or even allowed to offer by regulators. Another big draw, apparently, is this idea of no KYC verification.
KYC, know your customer, like proving who you are.
Exactly. No need to provide identification documents, photos, proof of address, that sort of thing.
So anonymity is a big part of it.
Right. That definitely appeals to people who, for whatever reason, want privacy. Or maybe people who couldn't pass the standard identity checks that licensed operators are required to perform. And yeah, you also have the situation where for people living in countries with very limited or maybe zero legal betting options, these unlicensed apps might seem like the only way they can participate at all. The source kind of sums it up as the appeal of a shortcut, but then immediately warns that the shortcut often ends as a trap.
And part of that trap is how deliberately they try to fool you, isn't it?
Yeah.
You mentioned they look really legitimate earlier.
Oh, absolutely. That's a huge part of their strategy. They are specifically designed to deceive. They'll often clone the logos of major, well-known, legitimate sports books. They'll use the exact same color schemes, mimic the entire user interface, the layout, everything.
So they're basically identity thieves, but for websites and apps.
Precisely. Yeah, that's a good way to put it. The source warns quite clearly that unless you know what to look for, you won't know you're in enemy territory. They create this whole facade of trustworthiness, using familiar branding, trying to trick you into thinking you're somewhere safe and regulated, when in reality, you absolutely are not.
Okay, that is genuinely chilling. So what are the practical steps? What does the source suggest you can actually do to protect yourself? How do you spot these dangerous apps?
The most crucial step, the number one thing, is always check for a valid license. Always. Legitimate, regulated betting platforms, they will display their licensing information, usually prominently like at the bottom of their website or maybe in the app's about or legal section. Look for logos or mentions of recognized licensing bodies, UK Gambling Commission, Malta Gaming Authority, Curaçao e-Gaming, places like that. If you can't easily find it, or if they mention some obscure jurisdiction you've never heard of or nothing at all, that's a major red flag. Huge.
Okay, check for the license first. Got it. What else?
Be very wary of downloading apps from outside the official app stores. So avoid those direct APK downloads if you can. If an app isn't on Google Play or the Apple App Store, you really need to ask yourself why. There's usually a reason, and often it's because they can't meet the safety and legitimacy standards. This is the primary way these unlicensed apps get distributed.
That's a really good point. Any other red flags to maybe look out for?
Yeah, be critical of reviews. Don't just glance at the average star rating. Actively look for the negative reviews. Specifically, search for user complaints about things like problems getting paid, sudden account closures, support being totally unresponsive. Genuine negative feedback from real users is often very, very telling. Ignore the suspiciously glowing 5-star ones sometimes.
And I suppose that old saying applies here more than ever.
Absolutely. The source reminds us, and it's classic advice, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. Those absolutely astronomical bonuses or odds that just seem way, way better than anywhere else, they're usually bait. Bait for an unregulated, potentially dangerous operation.
This really sounds like a massive problem, and you mentioned it's growing.
It is, yeah. The source indicates this digital black market isn't shrinking, it's expanding, and quite rapidly. And, the less aware people are of these tactics, these risks we've been talking about, the more easily these operations can keep trapping unsuspecting users. So raising awareness is probably the key defense right now.
Okay, so just to quickly recap the core dangers we've really unpacked here. Unlicensed means zero regulation, which means basically zero protection for you, the user. There are potential links to serious stuff like organized crime and fraud. And there's this layer of intentional deception where they're actively trying to trick you into thinking they're legitimate when they're anything but.
Exactly. Awareness is your best tool here. Just knowing how they operate, what those warning signs look like, it's crucial before you even consider downloading an app or putting any money down.
And the source leaves us with a really important question, doesn't it? Something to keep in mind the next time you see one of those flashy apps promising the world.
Yeah, that final question is, who's actually behind it? And what's the real cost of playing?
That's definitely something worth considering very carefully. Maybe look a little deeper next time based on what we've discussed in this deep dive.